What does it take to lose $2 billion? For the celebrated tech CEO Marcus Thorne, it wasn't a faulty algorithm, a data breach, or a sudden market crash. It was a cup of spilled coffee and a single venomous word directed at a waitress he believed was utterly insignificant. He was about to receive the most brutal lesson of his corporate life, that in the rarefied air of nine-figure deals, the most important asset isn't on the balance sheet. It's character. And his was about to be audited, weighed, and found wanting in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. The Sovereign Restaurant was not merely a place to eat, it was a theater of power. Nestled on the 65th floor of a gleaming skyscraper in downtown Chicago, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the sprawling city, a glittering carpet of lights that seemed to bow before its clientele. Here, fortunes were made and unmade over plates of seared scallops and glasses of vintage Bordeaux. The air itself felt expensive, thick with the scent of truffle oil, old leather, and unspoken influence. Every clink of silverware against porcelain, every hushed murmur was a note in the symphony of wealth. For the past 3 weeks, this gilded cage had been Catherine Vance's workplace. To the patrons and her fellow staff, she was simply Cat, a new waitress, who was surprisingly adept if a little reserved. She moved with an economy of motion that belied the heavy silver-plated trays she carried. Her uniform, a simple black dress with a crisp white apron, was immaculate. She was an anonymous face in a sea of service, a ghost who refilled water glasses, cleared plates, and answered questions about the wine list with quiet competence. She was by all appearances entirely ordinary. This anonymity was a carefully constructed fortress. Catherine Vance was not a waitress. She was the sole inheritor and principal decision-maker of Vanguard Legacy Partners, a private equity firm so exclusive and powerful it operated more like a myth than a corporation. With over $100 billion in assets, Vanguard didn't chase deals. It chose them. It didn't invest in companies. It invested in founders. And for 3 generations, every potential 9- or 10-figure investment had been subjected to the same final clandestine evaluation, the Vance test. The philosophy established by her grandfather was simple and brutal. A person's true character is not revealed when they are speaking to their equals or superiors, but in how they treat those they perceive to be beneath them. Before signing any check that could alter the course of an industry, a Vance would spend weeks working in a service position, a barista, a valet, a cleaner, a waitress at an establishment the target was known to frequent. They would observe, listen, and serve, all while conducting the most important due diligence of all. Most targets never even knew they were being tested. Most passed without incident. Tonight's target was Marcus Thorne, the charismatic and notoriously arrogant CEO of Ethereum Dynamics. His company was on the bleeding edge of quantum-integrated AI, a technology so revolutionary it promised to reshape global logistics, finance, and defense. Ethereum needed a massive infusion of capital, $2 billion, to scale its prototypes and corner the market. After months of vetting by her teams, after poring over every financial projection and algorithm, it all came down to this. It came down to Cat, a tray of bread rolls, and the character of one man. At precisely 8:05 p.m. he arrived. Marcus Thorne was every bit the titan of industry the magazines portrayed. Tall, with sharp features and a suit that probably cost more than Cat's car, he radiated an aura of impatient brilliance. He didn't walk into the restaurant. He conquered it, his eyes sweeping the room as if cataloging its worth and finding it adequate, but just barely. Trailing in his wake was a younger, more anxious-looking man named Nathan Chen, a junior analyst from Marcus's team. Nathan clutched a leather portfolio to his chest like a shield, his eyes wide with the nervous energy of someone swimming in the deep end for the first time. A corner booth, the one by the window. Marcus commanded the hostess, not asking but informing. He gestured toward the best table in the house, which was of course already reserved. The hostess, a seasoned professional named Charlotte, began to explain. "Sir, that table is reserved for the Morrison party." "Then the Morrison party can have another table." Marcus cut her off, his voice low and serrated. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I believe our reservation note specified a prime view." He had a way of speaking that made requests sound like non-negotiable terms of surrender. Charlotte, flustered but trained to de-escalate, quickly found another excellent table. As they were seated in Kat's section, she approached her posture, perfect, a small notepad in her hand. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Kat, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with some water, still or sparkling?" She asked, her voice calm and even. Marcus didn't even look at her. He was already scrolling through his phone, his thumb moving in a blur. "Sparkling, and bring me a Macallan 25. Neat." He didn't say please. "And for you, sir?" Kat asked, turning her attention to Nathan. Nathan jumped slightly, as if startled to be acknowledged. "Oh, just still water for me, thank you." He offered her a quick, apologetic smile, a silent acknowledgement of his boss's rudeness. Kat nodded. "Of course. I'll be right back with your drinks." As she walked away, she could already feel the familiar tension of the test beginning. She had served egotistical men before, men who saw her as part of the furniture. But there was something different about Marcus Thorne. It wasn't just arrogance. It was a profound, almost pathological lack of awareness that the people serving him were people at all. They were functions, objects programmed to deliver what he wanted. She returned with the drinks, placing them down with a steady hand. She recited the evening's specials, her voice a practiced, professional monotone. Marcus waved a dismissive hand mid-sentence. "Just get us the Wagyu tasting menu, and tell the chef not to be shy with the truffle. We're celebrating." He finally looked up, not at Kat, but through her, his eyes focused on some distant victory only he could see. This dinner is the final step before Ethereum Dynamics secures a $2 billion investment, the biggest private tech deal of the decade. Nathan shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Kat, as if to say he shouldn't be saying this. Kat's expression remained placid, a perfect mask of polite indifference. "An excellent choice, sir. Congratulations on your success." Marcus gave a short, humorless laugh. "It's not success yet, sweetheart. It's the inevitable conclusion of genius. There's a difference." The words hung in the air as Kat retreated to the kitchen to place their order. The test had barely begun, but the initial data points were already painting a grim picture. She passed Charlotte, who rolled her eyes in a silent gesture of solidarity. Kat gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod in return. The symphony of the sovereign played on, but for Catherine Vance, the only note that mattered was the discordant grating sound of Marcus Thorne's character. And it was already ringing terribly out of tune. The meal progressed like a slow-motion car crash. Each course brought with it a new display of Marcus Thorne's casual disdain. He sent back the consommé, claiming it was 2 degrees too cool. He complained that the sommelier's description of the wine was pedestrian, then proceeded to lecture the man on the terroir of the Burgundy region, with the confidence of someone who had read a Wikipedia article 5 minutes prior. Through it all, Nathan Chen sat in near silence, his posture growing increasingly rigid, his steak going cold on his plate as he watched his boss perform. Kat remained the consummate professional. She was a silent, efficient presence, anticipating needs, clearing plates, and weathering the quiet storm of Marcus's condescension. She refilled his Macallan without being asked. She replaced his silverware with surgical precision. She endured his habit of snapping his fingers to get her attention, a sound that echoed through the refined dining room like a gunshot. Each snap was a small humiliation, a public declaration of her station relative to his. Her face remained a neutral mask, but behind her eyes, the gears of a multi-billion-dollar decision were turning. The Vance test wasn't about finding saints. Her grandfather had always said that business was a blood sport, and a certain degree of ego and ruthlessness was necessary. The test was about identifying a fatal flaw, the inability to regulate one's behavior when one held all the power. A man who was cruel to a waitress for no reason was a man who would be cruel to a junior engineer with a brilliant but unproven idea. A man who couldn't handle a lukewarm soup without a tantrum was a man who would crack under the real pressure of a market downturn or a competitor's surprise move. Vanguard Legacy Partners didn't invest in liabilities, and Marcus Thorne was beginning to look like the human equivalent of subprime debt. The tipping point arrived with the coffee. They had finished their main course, and Marcus was holding court, his voice rising in volume as he described his vision for Ethereum. "It's not about logistics, Nathan, you see. That's what these Luddites at Vanguard don't get. It's about omniscience. Predictive analytics so powerful, we'll know a shipping container is going to be delayed 3 weeks from now because a dock worker in Singapore is about to get the flu. We're not selling software. We're selling the future." Kat approached with a tray holding 2 cups of espresso and a small pot of hot coffee for Marcus. She moved carefully, navigating the small space between their table and the one adjacent. "The head of this Vanguard fund is some old recluse," Marcus continued, gesturing wildly with his hand. "Probably inherited his money and spends his days polishing his monocle. They need me more than I need them. Once they see—" His hand, gesticulating to emphasize his own importance, shot out backward, striking the tray in Kat's hand. The jolt was sharp and unexpected. The coffee pot tipped, and a stream of scalding black liquid cascaded down, splashing across the pristine white tablecloth, and more significantly, onto the sleeve of Marcus's custom-tailored Xenia suit. Marcus leaped to his feet with a roar of fury. "Damn it!" The entire restaurant went quiet. Diners paused with forks halfway to their mouths, their conversations dying in an instant. All eyes turned to the source of the commotion. "I am so sorry, sir," Kat said immediately, her voice steady as she began dabbing at the spill with a napkin, her movements quick and practiced. "Sorry." Marcus snarled, his face a mask of purple rage. He wasn't embarrassed. He was incensed. He looked down at the dark stain blooming on his light gray suit sleeve, as if she had physically assaulted him. "This suit is worth more than you make in a month. Do you have any idea how careless you have to be?" "It was an accident, sir. Your hand hit the tray." Kat stated, her voice still level, though a chill had entered it. It was a simple statement of fact. This observation only fueled his fury. The idea that he might be even partially responsible was incomprehensible to him. He needed a target, a receptacle for his rage, and the waitress was the perfect one. "My hand, you incompetent girl, you practically threw it at me. I have a $2 billion meeting tomorrow, and I have to walk in there looking like I've been in a bar fight." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss that was somehow louder than his shout. "What is wrong with you? Can you not perform a simple task? Are you completely useless?" The word hung in the silent air. Useless. It was the ultimate expression of his worldview. She wasn't a person who had made a mistake. She was a tool that had malfunctioned, a thing that had failed its purpose. Nathan Chen looked horrified. He opened his mouth to speak, to perhaps defend her or calm his boss, but a single withering glare from Marcus silenced him. Nathan shrank back into his seat, his face pale with shame. Kat slowly stood up to her full height. She stopped dabbing at the table. Her eyes, which had been downcast and deferential all evening, lifted to meet Marcus's. For the first time, she truly looked at him. There was no anger in her gaze. There was no fear or humiliation. There was only a profound crystalline clarity. It was the look of a scientist observing a specimen of a judge who had heard the final piece of evidence and was now ready to pass sentence. She said nothing. The silence was more damning than any retort. Her calm, appraising stare seemed to unnerve Marcus more than tears or apologies would have. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes he didn't recognize, not servitude, but authority. It was so out of place that it short-circuited his rage for a brief second. "Get me your manager," he finally spat, recovering his bluster. "I'm going to have you fired." "That won't be necessary." Kat said, her voice quiet but resonant in the silent room. She placed the soiled napkin neatly on the table, turned without another word, and walked away. She didn't walk toward the manager's office or the kitchen. She walked directly toward the front of the restaurant, her back straight, her stride measured and confident. Marcus Thorne, fuming and self-righteous, watched her go. He felt a surge of satisfaction, the petty victory of a bully who had successfully asserted his dominance. He had put the little waitress in her place. He had no idea that she was walking away, not from her job, but from him. He had no idea that with one word, useless, he had just vaporized $2 billion and incinerated the future of his company. The test was over. The results were in, and he had failed more spectacularly than any candidate in the history of the Vance test. Catherine did not break stride until she was through the heavy oak doors of the Sovereign and out in the cool, sterile corridor of the 65th floor. She bypassed the elevators designated for the public and used her staff keycard to access a private service elevator at the end of the hall. The polished steel doors slid shut, encasing her in a silent, fluorescent-lit box. For a moment, she allowed her composure to crack. She rested her forehead against the cool metal wall and took a deep, shuddering breath. It wasn't the insult itself that bothered her. She had been called worse. It was the sheer, unadulterated ugliness of it, the casual cruelty wielded by a man who held so much power and yet possessed so little grace. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. Catherine, money doesn't change people. It just amplifies what's already there. A good man with $1 billion becomes a philanthropist. A cruel man with $1 billion becomes a tyrant. Our job is to never ever fund a tyrant. The elevator chimed, opening into the building's stark concrete-walled service level. She navigated a maze of laundry carts and supply closets to a small, windowless break room. She ignored the half-eaten sandwiches and gossip magazines on the table, went to her locker and pulled out her phone. There was only one person she needed to call. The phone rang twice before a familiar, quintessentially British voice answered. "Catherine, I was hoping to hear from you. How did our titan of tech fare on his final exam?" "He failed, Arthur," she said, her voice flat. "Spectacularly." Arthur Pendleton had been her grandfather's most trusted advisor and was now her own. For 40 years, he had been the loyal steward of Vanguard Legacy Partners, the man who handled the machinery of the firm, so the Vances could focus on the philosophy. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Define spectacularly. Did he complain about the wine selection undertip? "He called me useless." Catherine stated the word, tasting like ash in her mouth. She quickly recounted the entire evening, from the dismissive commands to the snapped fingers culminating in the spilled coffee and the venomous outburst. She described the look on Marcus's face, the terrified silence of his junior Nathan Chen, and the collective gasp of the entire restaurant. Arthur was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with disappointment. Good Lord, the arrogance. After all, our reports flagged his God complex as a potential risk factor. We had hoped he could moderate it in a professional setting. This is the professional setting, Arthur. Catherine counted a hard edge to her voice. He thinks the world is his professional setting. He believes anyone not in his direct line of sight to profit is an object, a function, not a person. He didn't see a waitress tonight. He saw a faulty piece of restaurant equipment. She could hear Arthur sigh, a sound like rustling parchment. And the technology, Catherine, the projections for Ethereum are astronomical, disruptive on a global scale. Are we certain a personality flaw should stand in the way of that? It was the question he was duty-bound to ask, the devil's advocate position he always took to ensure her decisions were ironclad. It's not a flaw, it's a foundational crack, she replied firmly. Think it through. A man who blames a waitress for a mess he caused is a man who will blame his engineers for a product launch he rushed. A man who belittles someone for a simple mistake is a man who will foster a culture of fear where nobody is willing to report bad news until it's too late. His ego is a greater liability than any market fluctuation. He will alienate partners, he will burn through talent, and when the real pressure hits, not a coffee stain, but a genuine crisis, he will shatter. We would not be investing in Ethereum dynamics. We would be funding the eventual spectacular implosion of Marcus Thorne. My grandfather would never have signed that check. There was another pause, this one shorter. No, Arthur agreed softly. He would not have. Your judgment is sound as always. The board meeting is scheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow. Thorne believes it's a final presentation and signing ceremony. I know, Catherine said. I'll be there. Will you be dressing for the part? Arthur asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. Catherine looked down at her simple black dress and stained apron. I think so. I'll need you to have a car ready for me at the service exit in 15 minutes. And Arthur, I want you to do some digging on the junior analyst Nathan Chen. He was there tonight. He was uncomfortable. He looked ashamed. He didn't have the courage to speak up against his boss, but he had the decency to know it was wrong. Find out what his story is. Consider it done, Arthur said. I'll make the necessary preparations. All contracts with Ethereum's name on them will be digitally shredded. I will leave one copy on the boardroom table for you, for dramatic effect. A small smile touched Catherine's lips for the first time that night. Thank you, Arthur. You know me too well. I knew your grandfather, Catherine. The apple does not fall far from the tree. She hung up and began to change. Off came the waitress uniform, the symbol of her anonymity. It was folded neatly and placed in her locker. She would have Charlotte, the hostess, compensated handsomely for the evening's disruption. She would ensure the restaurant staff who had witnessed the scene received a bonus that would make them forget the entire affair. From her bag, she pulled out a simple, elegant silk blouse and a pair of trousers. As she changed, she caught her reflection in the polished metal of the locker door. The face staring back was no longer Kat, the unassuming waitress. It was Catherine Vance, the woman who commanded armies of capital. The transformation was not in the clothes, but in the eyes. The deferential softness was gone, replaced by the cool, analytical steel of a CEO who had just made a $2 billion decision. She walked out of the service exit and into the waiting darkness of the alley. A sleek, black Audi A8, indistinguishable from the dozens of other executive cars in the city, purred silently at the curb. The driver, a man who had worked for her family for years, stepped out and opened the rear door. Good evening, Ms. Vance, he said, his face impassive. Good evening, Robert, she replied, sliding onto the plush leather seat. As the car pulled away from the curb, she glanced back up at the glittering tower. On the 65th floor, Marcus Thorne was likely demanding apologies from the manager, basking in his perceived victory. He was completely oblivious. He believed he was on the cusp of the greatest triumph of his life. He had no idea that his world had already crumbled, brought down not by a competitor or a market force, but by a 5'7" waitress whom he had judged to be useless. The unmasking was complete. All that remained was the reckoning. While Catherine Vance was being driven through the quiet arterial streets of Chicago, Marcus Thorne was celebrating. After Kat's departure, the restaurant manager had descended upon their table, bowing and scraping, with a level of frantic apology that Marcus found deeply satisfying. He was offered complimentary champagne, a vintage Dom Perignon, and the entire meal was of course comped. As it should be, Marcus had declared loudly to Nathan once the manager was out of earshot. Utterly unacceptable service. They're lucky I don't buy this building and turn it into a parking garage. He now sat in the back of his own chauffeured Maybach, the champagne having softened the edges of his earlier rage, leaving behind only the warm glow of righteous indignation. He had already forgotten the waitress's face. She was a footnote, a minor annoyance in the grand narrative of his ascent. You see, Nathan, he said, swirling the last of his Macallan in a crystal glass he'd taken from the restaurant. That's how you handle incompetence. You don't tolerate it, you excise it. You make it clear that mediocrity will not be countenanced in your presence. That is a lesson for you. Leadership is about setting standards. Nathan nodded, though his stomach was still in knots. The image of the waitress's calm, clear eyes was burned into his memory. He hadn't seen incompetence in her. He had seen a quiet dignity that his boss had tried and failed to shatter. Yes, Marcus, of course. She'll be fired by morning, Marcus continued with a wave of his hand. And she'll learn a valuable lesson about who she's dealing with. People like that need to be reminded of their place in the world. The car pulled up to the Ethereum Dynamics headquarters, a monument of black glass and steel that occupied a prime piece of real estate. Even at this late hour, lights blazed on dozens of floors. His company, like its CEO, never slept. They rode the private elevator up to the penthouse floor, which housed Marcus's office, a sprawling space that was less an office and more a temple to his own ego. One wall was a panoramic window overlooking the city. Another was covered in framed magazine covers, featuring his face, Forbes' Wired Fortune. The headline on the latest one read, "The Man Who Will Own Tomorrow." A small team of his top executives was waiting for him, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. They had been on standby all night, waiting for word from the dinner. "Well?" asked his chief financial officer, a weary-looking man named Jeffrey. Marcus strode to his desk and placed his glass down with a triumphant thud. "It's done," he announced, a wide, predatory grin spreading across his face. The dinner was a formality, a final look-see. The Vanguard people are dinosaurs, but they know a thoroughbred when they see one. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. we sign the papers. $2 billion. The largest Series C funding in tech history. The room erupted in a chorus of cheers and relieved applause. Bottles of champagne, which had been waiting on ice, were uncorked. Marcus held up a hand for silence. "This," he said, his voice resonating with theatrical gravity, "is not just a victory for us. It is a victory for vision. While our competitors were iterating, we were innovating. While they were focused on the next quarter, we were focused on the next century. This funding isn't just money. It's validation. It's the fuel for the engine that will remake the world." He basked in the adulation of his team, their tired faces now alight with hero worship. He was their visionary, their leader, the man who had willed this impossible company into existence. The incident at the restaurant, the useless waitress, the spilled coffee, it was all forgotten. An insignificant speck of dust brushed off the sleeve of his grand ambition. As the others celebrated, he pulled Nathan aside. "You were quiet tonight, Nathan. You looked nervous." "It was just a high-stakes dinner, Marcus. I didn't want to say the wrong thing." Nathan lied, avoiding his boss's piercing gaze. "There's no wrong thing to say when you're on the winning team," Marcus said, clapping him hard on the shoulder. "But I need you to learn something. Confidence. That's what they're investing in. They're investing in me, in my absolute unshakable belief in what we are doing. They see that, and the money follows. Don't ever forget that. Your numbers and spreadsheets are fine, but it's the aura of success that closes deals." He turned to look out the window at the city below, a conqueror surveying his domain. "Tomorrow you'll be in that room with me. You'll see firsthand how it's done. You'll watch me shake hands with some representative of the Vanguard board, and you'll see $2 billion flow into our accounts." He took a sip of his champagne. "Everything is going exactly as I planned. Nothing can stop us now." The dramatic irony of his statement was lost on everyone in the room. They were celebrating a future that had already been erased. They were toasting a deal that was already dead. Marcus Thorne stood at the pinnacle of his career, a king on the top floor of his castle, completely unaware that the very foundations of his kingdom had been washed away by a single cup of spilled coffee and a tidal wave of his own hubris. His facade of triumph was perfect, flawless, and utterly hollow. Morning was coming, and with it, a reckoning he could not possibly imagine. The next morning, The air in the Vanguard Legacy Partners lobby crackled with an almost religious reverence. It was a vast, cathedral-like space of white marble and polished chrome, silent, save for the whisper of a discreetly hidden waterfall. Marcus Thorne strode through it like he owned the place with Nathan Chen, trailing a few steps behind, clutching his portfolio even tighter than the night before. Marcus felt invincible. He had slept for 3 hours, but he was buzzing with a potent cocktail of adrenaline and supreme self-confidence. His stained suit from the previous night had been dispatched, and he was now wearing an even sharper, darker charcoal suit, a veritable suit of armor for the corporate gladiator. "Impressive, isn't it?" Marcus murmured to Nathan, gesturing at the soaring minimalist space. "Old money. They try to intimidate you with architecture. All a show. Remember, Nathan, we have the power here. They need our technology more than we need their cash." A composed woman with a sleek silver bob haircut greeted them. "Mr. Thorne, Mr. Chen, welcome. Ms. Vance is expecting you." Marcus's eyebrow twitched. "Ms. Vance, I was under the impression I'd be meeting with the board or with Mr. Pendleton." Arthur Pendleton was the only name he'd had direct contact with through the preliminary stages. "Ms. Vance is the final decision-maker on all principal investments." The woman replied smoothly, her expression unreadable. "She will be leading the meeting. This way, please." She led them down a long, silent corridor, lined with museum-quality modern art. The final door at the end of the hall was a single imposing slab of dark mahogany. The woman opened it and gestured for them to enter. The boardroom was even more intimidating than the lobby. It was dominated by a colossal black granite table, polished to a mirror shine. One entire wall was a window offering a breathtaking panoramic view of Lake Michigan. At the head of the table sat a single figure, his back to them, looking out at the water. It was an older gentleman with a shock of white hair, impeccably dressed. Marcus assumed this was the reclusive head of the fund. "Gentlemen, please have a seat," said the man, his voice a low rumble. It was Arthur Pendleton. He swiveled his chair around to face them. "Ms. Vance will be with us momentarily. She's just concluding a call." Marcus and Nathan took seats opposite him. The single thick document sitting in the center of the table was the only object on its vast surface. Marcus eyed it greedily. The $2 billion contract. "Mr. Pendleton," Marcus began, leaning forward with a conspiratorial smile. "A pleasure to finally meet in person. I trust all the final paperwork is in order." "Everything is in order." "Mr. Thorne," Arthur said, his eyes betraying nothing. "All arrangements have been made according to our standard procedure." The door to the boardroom opened again. "Ah, here she is now," Arthur said, a new tone in his voice. Both Marcus and Nathan turned their heads toward the door. A woman walked in. She wore a bespoke navy blue power suit tailored to perfection. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. Her shoes clicked with quiet authority on the marble floor. She carried a tablet in one hand, her movements economical and precise. As she came fully into the light, Nathan Chen's blood ran cold. He felt the air leave his lungs in a silent gasp. His eyes widened in horrified recognition. Marcus, however, just stared, a flicker of confusion on his face. He knew he'd seen her before, but his mind refused to make the connection. His brain had so thoroughly categorized the waitress from the night before as an insignificant non-entity that it couldn't place her in this context. A waitress, here in this boardroom. The idea was preposterous, a glitch in his memory. She walked to the head of the table, placing her tablet down next to Arthur Pendleton. She didn't look at Marcus yet. She looked at Nathan. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes held his for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, he knew his worst fears were real. Then she turned her gaze to Marcus Thorne. Her eyes were the same. They were the same calm, appraising, unnervingly clear eyes that had stared back at him in the restaurant just before she had walked away. The recognition finally slammed into Marcus like a physical blow. The blood drained from his face. The confident smirk froze, cracked, and melted away, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He looked from her to Arthur, then back to her, his mind scrambling to process the impossible reality before him. The waitress, the incompetent girl, the useless woman he had planned to have fired. She stood at the head of a $200 billion private equity firm's boardroom table. Catherine Vance extended a hand not to shake, but in a gesture toward the chair next to her. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice the same quiet, steady tone he remembered, but now it was not the voice of a servant. It was the voice of absolute power. "Please take a seat. We have much to discuss. Or rather, I have much to tell you." The reckoning had begun. In the deafening silence of the boardroom, Marcus Thorne finally understood that he had not been having dinner the night before. He had been taking a test, and the woman he had failed was now sitting in the judge's chair. Marcus Thorne sank into his chair, his movements stiff and robotic. The color had not returned to his face. The titan of tech, the man who owned tomorrow, looked small and utterly bewildered, a king suddenly stripped of his crown and robes in front of his entire court. His universe had been turned inside out in the span of 30 seconds. Catherine Vance took her seat at the head of the table. She didn't look triumphant or smug. Her expression was one of cool, dispassionate analysis, the way a doctor might regard a troubling X-ray. Arthur Pendleton sat beside her, a silent, observant presence. "I believe we met last night," Catherine began, her voice cutting through the thick silence. "At the Sovereign. You had the Wagyu tasting menu, and a Macallan 25. Marcus swallowed hard, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. I don't understand." "No," Catherine agreed. "You don't, and that is precisely the problem. Let me explain. My name is Catherine Vance. I am the principal partner of this firm. For 3 generations, Vanguard has operated on a core principle established by my grandfather. We believe that financial spreadsheets and market projections tell only half of a company's story. The other half, the more important half, is told by the character of its leadership." She paused, letting the words sink in. Marcus stared at her, his mind still reeling from the shock. "Before we finalize any significant investment," she continued, "we conduct one final piece of due diligence. We call it the Vance test. It's a simple real-world stress test designed to reveal a leader's true nature when they believe no one of consequence is watching. We place ourselves in a position of service, a valet, a barista, a hotel concierge, or in your case, a waitress. We observe how you treat people you perceive to have no power over you, no ability to advance your career or grant you a favor." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze pinning Marcus to his seat. "Your financials were impeccable, Mr. Thorne. Your technology is revolutionary. Your team on paper is brilliant. But you failed the most important test of all." She picked up the thick contract that lay in the center of the table. Marcus's eyes followed the document as if it were a life raft. "This is a $2 billion agreement to fund the global expansion of Ethereum Dynamics," she said, holding it up. "It represents months of work from dozens of analysts, lawyers, and strategists on both our teams." Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she began to tear the document in half. The sound of ripping paper was violent in the silent room. She tore it again and then again until the contract was nothing but a pile of shredded paper on the polished granite. A choked sound escaped Marcus's throat. "Why?" He whispered, his voice hoarse. "Because of a coffee stain. Because of a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding." Catherine's voice was laced with ice. "There was no misunderstanding. I understood you perfectly. I understood you when you snapped your fingers to get my attention as if I were a dog. I understood you when you lectured a sommelier who has dedicated his life to his craft. And I understood you with perfect damning clarity when you looked at me, a person you had never met, and called me useless because your own careless gesture caused an accident." She stood up and began to pace slowly behind her chair, her presence dominating the room. "This isn't about my feelings, Mr. Thorne. My feelings are irrelevant. This is a risk assessment. Your behavior last night was not an anomaly. It was a data point that revealed a catastrophic character flaw. A leader who cannot accept responsibility for a minor mistake will never accept responsibility for a major one. A leader who treats his subordinates with contempt creates a culture of fear where innovation dies because employees are too afraid to bring forth a dissenting opinion or a potential problem. A leader who is so insulated by his own ego that he is blind to the humanity of those around him is a leader who is quite simply a bad investment." She stopped and looked directly at him. "What happens when one of your brilliant but introverted engineers sees a fatal flaw in your quantum code? Will they feel safe enough to bring it to the man who publicly eviscerates a waitress over a spilled drink? Or will they stay silent, letting the flaw go to market, potentially costing our investment billions and ruining your company's reputation? I know the answer. You are a liability. Your ego is a greater threat to Ethereum dynamics than any competitor." Marcus finally found his voice a desperate pleading tone, replacing his usual booming confidence. "I apologize. I was under a lot of pressure. The deal, it was a big night. I was out of line. I am deeply, truly sorry." "You are sorry now," Catherine said, her voice unyielding. "You are sorry because the waitress you insulted is in a position to deny you $2 billion. You were not sorry last night when you thought I was just a waitress. That is the difference. That is the entire point. Integrity is what you do when no one is watching. And last night I was watching." She returned to her seat. "The verdict is, this Vanguard Legacy Partners is passing on the opportunity to invest in Ethereum dynamics. Our decision is final. We will be releasing a statement to the financial press this afternoon, citing a failure to align on core leadership principles." She then turned her gaze to Nathan Chen, who had been sitting as still as a statue, his face a mask of misery. "Mr. Chen," she said, her tone softening slightly, "I saw your face last night. I saw that you knew what was happening was wrong. You did not speak up, but you felt the shame of your leader's actions. That tells me something about your character as well." She slid a business card across the table toward him. It stopped just in front of his trembling hands. "Your CEO is about to drive his company into the ground. When you decide you no longer wish to be a passenger on that ride, call the number on this card. We are always looking for bright, analytical minds that are attached to a moral compass." With that, she stood. "Arthur will see you out. Our business is concluded." She turned and walked toward a private door behind her chair, not looking back. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Marcus Thorne sitting in stunned silence, staring at the pile of shredded paper that had once been his future. The verdict had been delivered. His kingdom had turned to dust. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Vanguard's statement, though professionally worded, sent a shockwave through the investment community. A failure to align on core leadership principles was polite corporate speak for a catastrophic character flaw in the CEO. Whispers turned into rumors, and rumors turned into panicked articles in the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg. Marcus Thorne, the untouchable wunderkind, was suddenly toxic. Other investors who had been circling pulled back. Key talent at Ethereum, sensing the coming storm, began quietly updating their LinkedIn profiles. Marcus Thorne tried to fight back. He gave an interview claiming creative differences and decried Vanguard as an archaic institution that couldn't comprehend his visionary approach. But the story of his humiliation was too good, too potent. An anonymous source from the Sovereign, likely a diner from a nearby table, leaked the story of the disastrous dinner to a prominent tech blog. The tale of the CEO, the waitress, and the $2 billion tantrum went viral. Marcus became a caricature, a meme for arrogant entitlement. His company, once a beacon of the future, was now a punchline. Within 6 months, Ethereum Dynamics filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, its revolutionary technology carved up and sold for scraps. 2 weeks after the fateful meeting, Nathan Chen walked out of the Ethereum Dynamics building for the last time. He had resigned, unable to stomach the increasingly paranoid and vitriolic atmosphere Marcus had created in the wake of his public downfall. He stood on the sidewalk holding a small cardboard box with his personal effects, feeling a strange mix of terror and relief. He took out the business card Catherine Vance had given him. For a long while, he just stared at it. It felt like a lifeline. He eventually made the call. He was hired by Vanguard not as an analyst, but as part of a new internal team Catherine was creating. Her goal was to develop programs that would identify and nurture ethical leadership in the tech startups they funded, ensuring that brilliant minds were paired with solid character. His first-hand experience of a catastrophic failure in leadership made him an invaluable asset. He had seen the abyss up close. Late one evening, months after the Ethereum deal had collapsed, Catherine stood in her office, which was the same boardroom where Marcus Thorne's world had ended. She looked out at the city lights, the same view she'd had from the Sovereign, but from a different perspective. Arthur Pendleton entered the room holding 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to her. "To the Vance test," he said, raising his glass. "Still undefeated." Catherine smiled faintly, swirling the amber liquid. "My grandfather used to say that a person's true self is like a tea bag. You don't know how strong it is until you put it in hot water." "Or hot coffee, as it were," Arthur quipped. She chuckled, a rare and genuine sound. "Or hot coffee. I felt no joy in destroying that man's company, Arthur." "You didn't destroy it," he corrected her gently. He did. He had been building his own funeral pyre for years, piece by piece, with every act of arrogance and cruelty. You simply declined to provide the match. And in doing so, you protected this firm and the legacy your grandfather built. She looked at Nathan Chen's preliminary report on her desk, a detailed and insightful proposal for their new leadership initiative. She saw hope in it. The $2 billion they had withheld from Marcus Thorne would now be used to fund a dozen other companies, led by founders who understood that strength was not the same as brutality, that confidence was not the same as contempt. The world was full of Marcus Thorne's men and women who confused power with worth and treated others as rungs on their ladder to success. But Catherine knew that true legacy wasn't built on the backs of people you trampled. It was built on the foundations of integrity, respect, and the simple, profound understanding that no one, not a CEO, not a janitor, not a waitress, is ever truly useless. And with that conviction reaffirmed, she turned from the window ready to find the next person, worthy of the investment, ready to conduct the next test. A year later, the black granite boardroom was transformed. The imposing table was gone, replaced by a circular arrangement of comfortable chairs. Whiteboards covered the walls, filled with sprawling diagrams and enthusiastic notes. This was the inaugural session of the Vanguard Leadership Initiative, a program conceived by Catherine and brought to life by Nathan Chen's meticulous design. Its purpose was not just to fund companies, but to forge the character of their founders. Catherine watched as Nathan, no longer a timid analyst, but a confident and engaging mentor, guided a discussion. "A brilliant product can get you to the first round of funding," he told the group of a dozen carefully selected entrepreneurs. "But a culture of trust and respect is what will get you through the first major crisis. Your people are not your assets. They are your partners. How do you build that partnership from day one?" His words resonated with a young woman named Sarah Jenkins, the founder of a promising biotech firm working on low-cost water purification. A former public school teacher from Detroit, Sarah's pitch had been less about hockey stick growth charts and more about the team she had assembled. "In my old job," Sarah explained to the group, "you learned that the quietest kid in the back of the room often had the most brilliant idea, but you had to build an environment of absolute safety for them to feel comfortable sharing it. Shouting down an idea doesn't make yours better. It just ensures you'll never hear a great one again." Catherine smiled. Sarah was the anti-Marcus. Her brilliance was matched by her humility, her ambition tempered by her empathy. Vanguard had led her seed funding round with a $10 million check, the first of what Catherine knew would be many. Later that afternoon, as a cool autumn rain began to fall, Catherine was leaving the building. As her car pulled up to the curb, her gaze drifted across the street. A man stood on the opposite corner, trying futilely to hail a cab. His suit was ill-fitting and slightly rumpled, his hair unkempt. He looked haggard, anonymous, just another face in the bustling city beaten down by the rain and the indifference of the world. It was Marcus Thorne. He was no longer a titan. The aura of power that had once preceded him like a shockwave was gone, replaced by a palpable air of desperation. Cabs sped past him, their drivers barely glancing his way. He was just a man in the rain getting soaked. Catherine felt no surge of triumph, no satisfaction, not even pity. What she felt was a quiet, somber confirmation. She was witnessing the natural state of a man stripped of the power that had been his only defining characteristic. Without his wealth and influence, he was hollow. He was invisible. Her driver Robert held the door open for her. She got into the warm, dry car without a word. As they pulled away from the curb, she looked back one last time. Marcus Thorne was still there, a ghost haunting the pavement of a city that had long since forgotten his name. His story was an echo, a cautionary tale she would carry with her. But as the car turned the corner, the image of his failure faded from her mind, replaced by the memory of Sarah Jenkins's determined face and the sound of a dozen new leaders passionately debating the nature of true partnership. The past was a lesson, not a destination. One man's empire had crumbled into dust, but from that dust, a dozen better ones were now being given the chance to grow. The verdict had been more than a rejection. It had been a reallocation, a reinvestment in a future built not on the ego of one, but on the potential of many. So what is the ultimate lesson in Catherine Vance's $2 billion decision? It's a powerful reminder that in a world obsessed with metrics, profits, and disruptive technology, the oldest and most human virtue character remains the most valuable asset. It shows that true power isn't about how you act when you're in the spotlight, but how you behave when you think no one is looking. Marcus Thorne's empire wasn't felled by a market crash, but by a catastrophic failure of his own humanity, a failure that was exposed by a woman he foolishly wrote off as insignificant. If this story of hidden power, quiet strength, and ultimate karma resonated with you, show your support by hitting that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And of course, subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories where the overlooked become the architects of destiny. We want to hear from you, so drop a comment below. What would you have done in Catherine's position? Would you have made the same call?